Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm joined by Dr. Robin Owen and Dr. Shuge Zhang. Welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Thank you, Dan.
Good to be here. Thanks, Dan.
Great to have you both on. Really exciting to be unpacking a paper you've both written along with colleagues on anxiety and sporting performance. But before we do that, let's do some introductions. Dr. Robin Owen, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for having me. I'm a senior lecturer in sport psychology at Liverpool Hope University. So my career trajectory was originally meant to become a physical education teacher, but then I kind of got stuck at university. As part of this, however, I've had the privilege to do a lot of coaching, especially at grassroots, and that has got me absolutely fascinated and obsessed with sports psychology. I was then fortunate enough to do my PhD at the same time as my colleague Shuge in Bangor University. That PhD was very much on how psychological mechanisms can affect our visual motor control. So essentially how we move and why we move in that way. Since then, I've continued with this line of work, but also tried to integrate a lot of my personal interests into my research. And I personally consider myself quite a anxious, stressed, nervous person. So I had a score to settle with anxiety with this research, basically. And yeah, thanks for having us on to chat about it.
Well, certainly, Robin, that resonates with me. The last thing you said, because I had an interesting relationship with my golf professional career and anxiety, and very much anxiety took over that. A wonderful Welsh accent you have there, Robin. Are you from the Bangor area? And just for everybody listening in, I mean, Bangor, what an incredible university that is for sports psychology. It's produced some of the world's leading sports psychologists. Robin, are you from around the North Wales area?
Yes, but my accent has gone complicated. So I'm originally from Austria. So my mother language is German with a heavy Austrian dialect.
Okay.
But I actually learned Welsh before English. So it is probably the weirdest and most strange method or trajectory towards eventually learning English. So yeah, it was very much German, then Welsh, and then English. And there was a long time when they were just one big mix of languages in my head. But I think I'm getting on top of it slowly but surely.
Wow, that's incredible. Really, really interesting.
It's the number one question I get at conferences. No questions about my research. The question is always, where's your accent from?
Okay. Well, Robin, look, it's so good to have you on, and I'm really excited to unpack this paper. And over to you, Shuge. Tell us about yourself and tell us about your work.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for having me. And I started to feel a little bit of pressure after Robin's introduction, to be honest. But yeah, I'm really happy to join here and to tell you a little bit more about myself. I'm currently a research professor in sport and exercise psychology at Hunan University of Technology. You probably never heard these universities. So I moved here. It's located in the central part of China. And the shooting place for the Avatar movie, is just about 3 hours drive from here.
Wow.
So people probably easier for people to locate where I am currently. Before moving to Hunan, my current university, I was lecturing in University of Derby, and Robin just mentioned that we did our PhD together. That was the time I would remember forever in North Wales, because you probably won't hear my North Wales accent.
No.
I don't know what my accent is, but that's the most memorable and the most meaningful place for me. My two sons actually were named with a Welsh name.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
So
What names?
one is Dylan, one is
Right.
Morgan. Yeah.
Brilliant. What took you to England and then Wales to study sports psychology?
Wow, that's a really good question. There's a story behind that. I was actually not from a background of psychology at
Okay.
all. I was doing management and finance, and used to be a working in finance industry before I came to England. I was a finance consultant in Hong Kong for a couple of years before deciding to quit my industry and rejoin a new study journey to learn sports psychology. And that was a life turning point, I would say. There was an end of year campaign many years ago. I could call it many years ago because it's obviously more than 10 years ago. Couldn't remember. Um, there was an end of year campaign, and my company invited one of the sports psychologist practitioners, sports psychology practitioners for the Chinese Olympic team to our end of year campaign
Okay.
talk show, who introduced the sports psychology and introduced how those Olympic athletes actually prepared for their campaign, which attracted me so much. And I decided that's the thing I really want to learn, study, or probably I want to explore whether I could um, make a different life. And then I started to do research, started reading, and then learn psychological skill training and lots of the different things, anxiety theories and frameworks. And Banga came out during my search of literature. So as you just introduced, that Bangor is one of the probably best place for sports psychologists. Yeah, there were lots of works, world-leading work produced in Bangor, and then I applied their MSc program, which then brought me to their PhD program. Yes, that's the story behind.
And that's how you found yourself in Wales. And if I may just ask, because I'm fascinated to learn just a little bit about this sports psychology in China, a growing area, an area that is prominent and prevalent now. Can you just give us a brief description of the state of sports psychology in China?
Absolutely fine. Sports psychology is absolutely growing in China, although it's still not dominating in terms of the mainstream compared to mainstream or clinical psychology. Most of the Chinese people probably heard about clinical psychology, psychiatry. People may ask what is sports psychology. However, it is indeed a growing field, especially in terms of serving the elite athletes. So we have a growing body of practitioners serving athletes or athletes training systems or talent development programs at different levels. However, sports psychology is also relatively unpopular in China in terms of a study area. I have to be honest, but in terms of its a kind of industry, it's growing, and there is a gap between how we train sports psychologists and how we bring people back to work in this kind of practitioner industry, I would say. Because currently I don't see many sports psychology programs at undergrad or postgraduate its levels. Most of the sports psychologists that they were actually trained overseas or outside China, not in the China mainland or other areas of China. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a little bit of um, idea of what sports psychology proceeds in current Chinese market.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like an area you're going to be driving forward in China. We're here today to talk about anxiety, predominantly performance anxiety. You've written a paper alongside colleagues Shannon Rich, Zhang, Caroline Wakefield. You've written a paper on performance anxiety, the mechanisms that underpin performance anxiety, the experiences of players. The exact title is Qualitative Experiences of Self-Focused Distraction and Interactionist Anxiety Performance Mechanisms. What do players perceive? Coming over to you, Robin. I'm keen to unpack what anxiety is from a sporting perspective, and perhaps what the theories are that underpin this. But can you give us a sort of a brief and succinct background with relation to this particular paper?
Yeah, absolutely. It was nicely demonstrated with just how much of a mouthful the title of the article is. I think it's really fascinating and extremely exciting just how little we know about the mechanistic workings of anxiety. So I still think we've only begun to scratch the surface of it. We've got a bit of an idea of roughly how anxiety works as mechanisms, but there's still such a long way to go. And this is hopefully for mine and Shuge's research a really useful turning point and a little nice kind of starting point for much bigger things to come even. So essentially, there are different standpoints on how anxiety works mechanistically. There is one camp which proposes that you might be distracted by anxiety. So you might think worrisome thoughts that concern you, like what will my coach think if I mess this shot up? Will my parents be disappointed? How uncomfortable it might feel or embarrassing it might be if you are in this situation. And those consume attentional control and capacity, and result in worse performance. And we'll get into more of that later on, I'm sure. But then on the other end, you've got a situation where there's another line of theories which proposes the complete opposite, and I absolutely love it, where they're self-focus based, so around reinvestment, for example, where an individual might, as a well-intentioned coping strategy, try to reinvest knowledge they have about the skill and consciously control the action. Now, again, although this is well intentioned, the net result can often be that the person interferes with the movement organization and makes it less automatic. And if it's less automatic, probably the performance will degrade as a consequence. So you've got these two standpoints which propose complete opposites, attention being shifted away from the task or excessively towards the task. And the big desire of both Shuge and I with our work is to try and untangle whether or not they really are mutually exclusive or if they can interact.
What I'm hearing you say there, Robin, two underpinning theories that during anxiety, players, competitors, people may be distracted, where attention is shifted away from the task at hand, and then there's the self-focus theory governed by reinvestment. I reinvest my attention into my action, for example, and I start to try to take control of my action. Very much thinking about my golf career there. Am I hearing you correctly,
Yes,
Robin?
100%. So I have a bit of a vendetta and a score to settle with all of this, because I remember in my undergraduate, there was an assessment where we had to write in the same essay about both of those theories, and I started to link them together on how they might interact. And I got marked down for linking them because they are supposed to be, at that point in time, mutually exclusive, or that was what was a bit more accepted at that time. So, long story short, it's probably taken 10 years now to get to this point where I can actually tackle it as a proper research question and see if those two mechanisms and those theories can interact, and if so, how.
Well, you see, I think this is really interesting what you said, Robin, and this is why I'm fascinated by this paper. And we'll come over to you here, Shuge, because, listening to what Robin has said there, I'm hearing there's these two theories that people are reporting to be polar opposites. I can be distracted or I can be, refocusing on myself. And yet at the coalface, I find as a practitioner psychologist, by and large, a lot of players experiencing both when they are engulfed in anxiety. And I've got to say, case study of one as in me, boy, I definitely had both on the first tee. I definitely had both when I competed. And what you're both saying here is there's this idea of an interaction between two. Am I hearing this correctly, Shuge? That there's more going on than meets the eye. There's not just a one simple explanation for this.
Yes, I would say interaction in terms of interaction obviously is a language we use in this kind of academic writing. But it ought to
Okay.
reflect the idea behind what we see attentional control or destruction and reinforcement not being mutually exclusive. Although people tend to report that they either experienced destruction, like worrying mind, or reinvestment, like conscious processing, like monitoring how one perform. However, the debate was whether it was destruction or worrying mind that actually impaired performance, or whether it is the reinvestment that actually impaired performance. And over the past 20, 30 years, so it becomes two schools of thoughts, if I can say that. So one school embracing the attentional control or destruction kind of idea suggests it was the worrying mind of anxiety that actually impairs performance. However, for the other school who believe reinvestment is more debilitative, they suggest that it was actually worrying mind is okay, but probably it's more the reinvestment or conscious processing, explicit monitoring of one's task processing being more problematic. So there is the debate in this kind of what is the real mechanism behind why anxiety impacts performance. However, Bolton and Robbins came up with this idea. They could be both debilitative, or they on its own, they do not have to be impairing performance, because there is a kind of interaction or interplay between these two that actually damage performance.
I've got you. So what I love about what you've done there, Shugo, you've sort of completed my thought on it's. Again, if I go back to my personal experience, I had the worries. I kind of reinvested my attention back into my golf swing. Now, both of these happened, but with the debate is, well, but which one is debilitating performance? So that's what you're trying to uncover. The hypothesis is it could be both. It can be both together. It could be one or t'other. That's what I'm hearing you both say here. Am I along the right lines? Question to either
Yeah,
of you.
100%.
All right. So tell me, how did you go about studying this? Who were you studying, and how did you go about doing this?
Yeah, so because this is a novel line of work and something that's only slowly becoming more and more accepted in the literature, is we wanted to take quite an open-minded approach. So although neither Shuge or I consider ourselves qualitative researchers, we came to the conclusion that actually we might have to put ourselves through the pain and suffering of learning qualitative approaches to try and get a better understanding of athletes' own perceptions. So a lot of research in this area is very much experimental, cognitive, laboratory based. But what we wanted to see is, well, what do athletes actually feel themselves? And it's really interesting then that you yourself have just identified that you can experience both. And for me, this qualitative approach has really opened my eyes. And there were some quotes and instances during interviews where I was thinking, oh, whoa, I never thought of this. I can't believe I didn't think of it myself, because that's just the advantage we've had with this qualitative approach, where we just see what people themselves experience. So one instance where I was quite surprised and annoyed with myself that I never thought of it is this bidirectional relationship between distraction and self-focus. So, for example, an individual might try to self-focus, but that self-focus attempt of controlling the actions might become contaminated by the simultaneous distraction. So while normally it would be facilitative that they have the correct posture, the correct stance, the correct foot positioning, that all is slightly off or very much off potentially because they haven't got the resources available because of distraction to execute the self-focus effectively. While the opposite relation is that some of our players reported that the self-focus itself became a distraction. So they were so focused on trying to execute the movements and actions how they've trained and with the correct technique that they missed important elements of the game and essentially were distracted by their own actions. So this study was collected with invasion sport players. The sample consisted of regional level netball players. We thought that would be quite nice because it is a complex task with potentially many different reasons for performance failure. And the philosophy I took going into it together with Shuge was that we all experience performance failure at every level. And therefore, wherever we start with this line of work and continue, it is relevant at almost every level. The exact mechanisms might be slightly different, but it is really fascinating at any level. We all sometimes suffer with anxiety, and elucidating that is has been really fun.
So, netball players, a team invasion sport, young players, I'm guessing, sort of early 20s, all British, I'm guessing as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned this word qualitative. For those listening in, I'm assuming this was an interview style type research.
Exactly.
Again, throwing this back to you, Robin, a few questions there. Am I getting all of that right?
Yes, absolutely. So a qualitative approach to research involves essentially collecting opinion-based verbal data from participants. So instead of seeing how well they perform in a laboratory or perform different shots, instead it's all about their opinions and perceptions. And it's guided by the philosophy, well, it depends which standpoint you take, but a standpoint is that all of us have unique experiences, which are uniquely valuable and mean that we see the world in different ways. So I had my own viewpoint of how distraction, self-focus, and interaction might work, but that's where this approach and seeing other people's opinions and experiences has just totally opened my mind, and that's what we've tried to capture in this paper.
And so results, as always with these qualitative processes, is broken down into themes, and I'd love to unpack these themes as we go through the results section and learn a little bit about what you found about the relationship between anxiety and performance, and thinking about those mechanisms. So to either of you, should we start to break this down into these themes?
So, from what we've seen from the interview and our analysis of the interview scripts, we've seen a couple of really nice themes coming up. And one is self focus. We did see people reporting self focus, like monitoring how they perform, how they actually did the movement. And we also see people reporting experience and or experience about destruction, especially relating to worrying mind. And different sources of worrying mind might be from worrying not performing well, or not meeting expectations, or other things. But the most fascinating result to me is there were quite a large proportion of um, participants actually mentioned how the self-focus and the destruction mechanisms or experience actually interplay with each other, like Robin just briefly introduced, like focusing on the self or focusing on how one perform the task could eventually lead to greater worrying mind, or starting with struggling with worrying mind actually lead to a greater investment into conscious processing also. So in that term, I'd say so these results are really fascinating in terms of unpacking how these two different things are actually interplay with each other. So in to that end, it challenged some of the existing theories that these two things are mutually exclusive, or one is overtaking the other in terms of how anxiety influence performance. So those are the key themes as I see. But there were more sub themes or more details in that paper. Robin, maybe you can cover that.
Yeah, so we've had a general structure where our overarching themes were distraction, self-focus, and then the interaction. And within each of those, we split it into sources of those mechanisms and then why they might lead potentially to failure. And that has also, for myself, helped conceptualize a lot of the literature much more clearly. So, for example, in terms of distraction themes and some of the new findings in this study, I alluded to it earlier with that bidirectional relationship where distraction might induce self-focus, but self-focus can potentially also comprise distraction itself. And then both together, those different sources of interaction can lead to a failure where because we have almost this interference control we need to engage in, we might have a disproportionate load on our cognitive resources and thus performance failure potentially. Now, as I was putting all of this together, I thought back to my research training and particularly Occam's razor. And Occam's razor proposes that the simplest explanation is normally the best. And then the more I started putting all of this, or we started putting all of this together, the more annoyed I got because I couldn't keep it simple. It just got more and more complicated the more I thought about it. So one message in the paper is that Occam's razor is very important and we should try and keep things simple. But perhaps anxiety and performance are inherently deeply complex. One line of research which we haven't brought into it yet in this paper is then, for example, how appraisals of anxiety influence it, for example. So if someone appraises anxiety as something facilitative, positive, maybe as a challenge, or interprets anxiety as something negative, maybe more of a threat. So there is still a long way to go before we finally achieve what I'm waiting for, which is a holistic model of all of the anxiety performance mechanisms under the sun stuffed onto one piece of paper. So that's long term what I can't wait for us as sport psychologists and academics to eventually put all together.
I'm just reading through some of the results here and some of the feedback that you got. I always love picking out mini quotes from the text and just coming to some of the quotes. I mean, within distraction and speaking to the sources of distraction, one player says, "I wasn't even thinking about anything like netball, really. I was just thinking that I'm really worried about how this game's going. I feel like I'm not good enough." And another player said, "I know she was saying to do tactical things." Obviously, talking about the coach here, but in my head, I kind of wanted to say, "No, I can't do it." And I couldn't. Another player said, "I can't play netball." Just like, oh God, why am I in this league? Why they're so much better? So I'm not good enough. That's just under distraction and the sources of distraction. And there's some more really interesting quotes here. Under self focus. A player says, I was trying to think about how I'm catching and throwing a ball so much that when it's happening, it felt so wrong. Sounds like me in golf and my golf swing. Another player says, and this is coming to the interaction now, the combination of the both. I get frustrated and sort of that goes into my whole head loss and then like the anxiety with it. And like just thinking about my movements and that sort of thing can impact my performance negatively. So an interesting sentence there that combines, as you're describing, the anxious thoughts, the worry, as you'd say, Shuge, combined with, and now I'm thinking about movements as well, which again was very indicative of my experience in high performance sport and understanding, well, that's impacting my performance. I'm struggling to put the club on the golf ball here. So I'm probably not directing a question at you both, but I love unpacking those sentences that relate to the experiences of players. I think that's so insightful for us as sports psychologists, as coaches, to really understand what goes through players' heads. And I think this happens more often than people realize, because I think that's how we're designed as human beings, is to really judge what's going on around us and judge ourselves with relation to what's going on around us and how we're playing and all of our experiences. I don't want to step too far outside of the paper here, but for me, all that comes under the umbrella of anxiety, Robin and Shuge.
You mentioned these kind of phenomenons, when people think about like self-judge or being self-critical becoming more and more common, or these phenomenons or being self-critical is probably always dominating. And in my mind, I think these are the silence behind anxiety, and that's probably refers to why qualitative research or doing an interview kind of study is so important to further explore or develop anxiety performance related knowledges, because previously Robin just also mentioned that in this field, anxiety research on anxiety and performance and its practices, most of the research and the things are quantitative, experimental. It happened in laboratory. However, it's so important for us as researchers to unfold these silence, and to have this voice out, and to really understand what people actually experience, and that way could probably feed forward to how we may do research in future. Because actually, although this paper is recently published, the data collection finished probably more than 1 year ago, and after this study, actually, Robbie and I, we were also started another study, and which from with the learning from these interviews and the participants' experience, we went back to laboratory settings and the retest, trying to refine our theories and the hypotheses and trying to see. So I think that's the fascinating thing, because both Robin and I, we kind of went out, broke our comfort zone to start working on qualitative work, because we didn't used to be a qualitative researcher. However, this experience is really fascinating, as it's just so meaningful in terms of how we as researcher move our work continuously.
Yeah, I fully agree with everything Shuk said. One thing that speaks quite nicely to it was just how quick and also open our participants were to provide their experiences. I've practiced qualitative interviews in different topics before, where it becomes a struggle to get deep, meaningful answers out of participants. But a lot of our participants in this study straight away knew exactly how their head worked, and what they were experiencing and how anxiety was affecting them. And it was really quite eye-opening just how different some of those experiences were. And we've got a table in our publication which just breaks down which mechanisms and which sources the various players were experiencing. And there is a whole mix. So another thing I've kind of like learned from this experience is just how one size might not fit all, and that people really differ quite a lot in terms of which mechanisms they actually experience. So yeah, that was just another tidbit I've got quite excited about in this entire process.
Which is a nice segue on to my next question, because you speak to individual differences there, and that draws on the complexity for us as practitioners at the coalface and for coaches as well in their day-to-day experiences and interactions with players. What are the applied implications here? Because you speak to complexity, you speak to individual differences here. Question to both of you, and you both might have different thoughts and ideas here, but and there is a section in the paper, I should say, with applied implications. So whether it's for us at the coalface as sports psychologists, or for coaches listening in, what does all of this mean, and how can this impact our work?
Yeah, so I think more than anything, it speaks to the individualization of interventions. So applied sport psychologists might want to consider whether or not one size fits all. Is it a matter that the individual's anxiety needs to be reduced, or actually is the anxiety level appropriate, but are they just not dealing with it correctly? Are they experiencing excessive distraction potentially for some reason? So, and is that something that can become reappraised? Or are they perhaps too prone to self-focus and try to consciously control their actions? Or is it a mix of both? And if it is a mix of both, then perhaps interventions which tackle both of those mechanisms might need to be implemented. So, for example, if an individual is experiencing both distraction and self-focus, they might benefit from pressure training to help become used to the distractions, and perhaps adopt an external focus of attention and/or quiet eye to potentially focus their mind and avoid some sort of self-focus and reinvestment mechanism. And I know that Shuge also has had some great ideas surrounding narcissism. I don't know if you want to jump in there and tell us some of that.
Oh, thank you, Robin. Well, narcissism must be an interesting topic, but generally speaking, that's leave narcissism there for now. I mean, traditionally, coaches or practitioners tend to, for example, try to help athletes to cope with anxiety. For example, by try to apply external focus, for example, and try to maintain automatic processing. If one believe reinvestment is is why anxiety, for example, impair performance. However, from based on our findings and also some of our previous work as well, it might be the case that for some of the capable performers or capable athletes who are less prone to anxiety or who can tolerate great level of anxiety, or they may have more kind of cognitive resources to deal with the task performance, they may be able to purposefully apply for self-focused strategies to as a compensation to facilitate their performance. Well, this is still a hypothesis because we haven't really had any data to support this. However, joining from our findings and from the conceptualization of the interactionist hypothesis, it's only when one's resources or capacities um, can't accommodate the demands for worrying mind and self-focus, the performance decline will occur. However, for those capable performers, it is probably okay for them to use self-focus strategies as a compensation or help them to refocus when they experience destruction. And but these are potential implications or important implications in my mind, and that actually has a link to narcissism or narcissistic players or performance, as Robin just mentioned. In really, really brief introduction to narcissism, if we see it's we're not talking about clinical side of narcissism. If we see narcissism as a normal personality, and then it is probably refers to those individuals who are relatively high in self-centered, but also like to take opportunities to show off. So, for example, in sporting field, players who like to show off is probably those who can tolerate greater level of anxiety and the pressure. Because when other people who normally tend to fail or tend to quit or tends to not performing well, it is the opportunity for them to show off. So narcissistic individuals will find tend to tolerate higher or greater level of anxiety or pressure. And for these people, self-focused strategy uh, may be fine for them, and which contradicts with our existing knowledge that we try to avoid. No self-focus, no reinvestment, try to maintain automatic processing. So those are the probably our older fields. However, I think from our work and of course, hopefully our future work as well, and one important implication I see is that self-focus could be a potential purposeful strategy to facilitate performing under pressure.
Really, really interesting, Sugar. And so unpacking that slightly and trying to bring that alive as best I can in my own mind. And correct me if I'm getting this wrong. We might all, as we listen to you, think about our favourite player in our favourite sport who maybe might tend to be somebody we would perceive as quite confident and project a great deal of self belief. That might be our favourite player in our favourite sport. And what you're saying is that rather than that player, when experiencing any kind of anxiety, rather than the intervention being get out of your head into the game cues, get out of your head into the environment around you, that player actually might be better served getting into their own game, into their own body, into their head, and enjoy expressing themselves in the way that they like to play. And they might have some self-focused cues almost where they're reinvesting back into their game. Am I kind of understanding you correctly from that perspective?
Absolutely, we are thinking in the similar line.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting because to meet both of your points, there's such a strong and I write about this every day. There's such a strong argument to that external focus of attention, which I truly believe in. But I sometimes wonder with athletes having a mix of techniques and skills and ways of doing things can be optimal. I can choose to get out of my head into the game cues. Equally, I can remind myself of something that's important to me in my game to be the best individual and the best teammate I can be. Ultimately, I can direct my attention, and I might have a preference, but equally I can choose which way to direct my attention. I can take control of my attention. That for me at the coalface seems to be the optimal way to go about this. No question, gents. Just a thought back at you from my experiences. Don't know what you think, Robin.
Yeah, I fully agree. And as someone who's done quite a bit of work on focus of attention, I really hope you on purpose made an optimal theory pun there by saying that's the optimal approach.
Of course I did.
Yeah, I fully agree that sport psychology and anxiety performance is messy. And I know that you didn't call it messy, but maybe I am saying it's really complicated,
Yes.
and that we have to be quite open-minded about which approaches we take. And I think this study and the work Shuge and I are doing speaks to that.
And of course, I made that pun on purpose. And Gabby Wolf and Rebecca Luthwaite would be delighted with me. We've had a few conversations on the Sports Psych show about optimal theory, so people listening in can go in search of that. Well, gents, what an absolutely fascinating conversation. I love, I mean, to meet what we were just saying at the end there, I do believe it's complex. I do believe it's messy. Ultimately, for me as a practitioner at the coalface, if I was to simplify it, it really is. I want a competitor or competitors that I work with. I want to give them the best opportunity. And I don't want to step too far away from anxiety here, but ultimately concepts and constructs tend to fuse together. Ultimately, I want them to take control of their attention. To me, that is a performer. That word control I think, is interesting and controversial, but I want them to, as best as they can, take control of their attention to respond to their internal world, to respond to their outer world. And I think papers like this, where you're going in much more depth about this, is really useful for practitioners like myself and for coaches who are there scratching their head trying to make sense of the human experience in high performance sports. So I can't thank you enough for this paper. Just briefly coming to you first, Robin. I know you will have tapped the interest of everybody listening in. So how can people find you, follow you, and potentially get in contact? And how can they find the paper?
Great. So the paper is open access in the Journal of Sport and Exercise Psychology. So anyone can go read it, access it, and look at it. And then in terms of contacting me, the easiest way is probably over LinkedIn. If you search Robin Owen, Liverpool Hope University, you will, for better or for worse, probably find me.
Always for better. Always for better. And Dr. Shuge Zhang, how can people find you, follow you, and potentially get in contact?
Well, people can search my name on Google and find my email easily, hopefully. And the email will be the best way to contact me.
Perfect. Dr. Robin Owen and Dr. Shuge Zhang, thank you so much for today. I really appreciate your time.
Fantastic. Thanks for having us, Dan.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that episode, and I hope you did too. I'd love to hear what you think of the Sports Soap Show, and if you do have any suggestions, please do get in touch via X or through Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the show. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.